My name is Newman Rossie. Most everybody called me growing up A.N., the initials, Junior, after my dad. And I kind of like my middle name, so that's the name I went by, as I got older. And was born in 1944, so I'm a young 79. And ended up growing up in Clarksdale and thought it was, as any kid should think of their hometown, as the greatest place in the world. And just a great time, great memories growing up. And my dad ended up in the restaurant business and eventually decided to open the largest all-black theater in Mississippi, including bigger than the one in Jackson, Mississippi. And so I grew up in the motion picture industry and learned about pretty much the culture as a kid, but very naive in terms of relations between people of all colors. You just didn't know the difference. But at the same time, there was a difference of what you were taught growing up. And being full-blooded Lebanese people were not real accepted in the Mississippi Delta, along with Italians and Jews. You had quite a few ethnic groups. How they got to Mississippi, I don't know. But I grew up with all different types of people, which I think makes me a little more unique than a lot of kids in Mississippi who grew up in really these one small towns with very little population, because 20,000 people in Clarksdale was a lot of people in Mississippi. And as time went on, you just kind of grow and learn, get educated, and realize we have a lot of problems in this country. And I ended up working and going to school in Mississippi, high school graduate, college graduate, and then I left, as many people do in Mississippi.
You make it sound like that's you in a nutshell, Mr. Rossie.
Oh.
That's all 79 years, all said and done, which we know that's not true. I'm interested in why your dad wanted to buy this movie theater. What made him say, this is where we need to go?
Yeah. At the time, when my dad considered a movie theater, he had opened a theater, and I was very young and remember only a little about it, but it was called the Roxy. And it was open maybe 2 or 3 years. I just remember vaguely as a kid about that theater. And apparently he did very well. He had gotten out of the food business, and a lot of the Lebanese were merchants. And there was a large black population in the Mississippi Delta because of cotton. And there was really no entertainment venues as far as movie theaters were concerned. The other theaters in the town were pretty much segregated. There were balconies that were allowed for other races, but there was no venue to speak of for a large black population looking for entertainment. And as I look at the street of Essequina, you could call it the Times Square of Clarksdale, Mississippi. On a weekend or Saturday night, it was packed with folks who pretty much kept all those merchants in business for many years. So my dad, having done very well in the Roxy Theater, decided to build a new one, and it was called the New Roxy. And he ended up buying all the property from the Roxy all the way to the end of the corner, all the businesses there. So he pretty much owned a lot of the property there. He was quite an entrepreneur for that time period. And he built this theater in around 1952. I remember a lot of getting involved in the business and liking it when I was about 10 years old, because he let me actually book a particular movie as I would go to Memphis, where all the film exchanges were, and got to know all the people as I was growing up. And then eventually I just fell in love with the theater. I would go down there when it was closed just to be there by myself. I don't know, it was just a comfort zone for me, so to speak. And eventually I sort of took over the booking of movies for the theater, getting the right kinds of movies that would appeal to the audiences we had, because I didn't feel like he knew all that much. And as I was getting older, I just said, we're not playing the right kinds of movies. For example, we needed more Western movies, which were very popular genre in the 1950s, as opposed to a movie with Louis Armstrong and Grace Kelly. That was no interest, pretty much. And so I pretty well sort of took over the buying and booking and ordering supplies and getting to know as I got older. And at the same time, my dad was sick. He had had high blood pressure, which is not a death sentence today, but he died very young at 56. And luckily I sort of got into the business, because as a teenager, I started doing the booking, the buying, signing of contracts. Even when I was in college, salesmen from all the companies would travel, and I was in Starkville, Mississippi, and they would stay at the alumni house, and I would sign contracts and order supplies and this, and every now and then go home on the weekends to see how things were going. My mother really didn't know a whole lot about the business, but I pretty well kept that theater going, and we had some of the largest grosses that we had ever had out of that theater. When I say grosses, I'm talking about a movie called Go Johnny Go with Chuck Berry, and there was a movie called Mr. Rock and Roll with Alan Freed, and those type of movies, Shake, Rattle, and Rock with Fats Domino. And the theater was probably the best grossing theater, including all the theaters in the city, because of the audience we had. We had a much larger population going to the movies there than anywhere. All races were invited and encouraged to come. It's just that it was the 1950s, it was the 1960s, and things just weren't where they are today. And I have to say, that movie theater sent all 7 children to college. And my dad had always said he wanted his girls as well as his sons to get a degree, and didn't want, particularly his girls, all 5 of them, never to rely on a man. Where back then the attitude was, the man is the breadwinner and the wife stays home. And as I look back over my sisters and their lives, I'm glad they were educated, and I'm glad that theater was able to do it for us, as my dad had passed away. So eventually the theater, as I got older and had moved away, was rented to a few folks locally, and kept it going for a small period of time, and then eventually it closed. What happened was,
We'll let this.
I'm not sure where I was.
Sure, it's okay. I have another question
Okay.
to ask, and then we'll get back to that.
Okay.
My dad does say that like he loved going to that theater because that theater played the stuff that the other theaters didn't play.
That's
right?
right.
Like that's a real big point. People needed a venue to go to watch some stuff that maybe, like you said, wasn't very stuffy or wasn't melodramatic. You know, westerns, blaxploitation films, kung fu films. My dad said he really enjoyed Godzilla and things like that.
Right.
Since he watched theaters like that. And the film that I'm making about this, the example that he gives actually is Lemonade Joe. Do you know that western? It's a western from Eastern Europe that's filmed entirely in yellow, and he says like that's the type of stuff that you would find at that movie theater.
Yeah.
And so it becomes a space for black people to go. In the South during segregation. Your place becomes a welcoming place because they can't find that welcoming at the Paramount or
the Tyson.
Right.
At that time, it was called the Tyson. Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
But it was amazing. You know, we all worked that. Well, not all of us, but most of us all worked there in the theater. And I mean, I can remember standing on my feet on a weekend, my sister and I, doing 80 pounds of hot dogs, 10 cents a piece, things like that. The other sisters would work in and out, but they were older and they were kind of gone off to college and all that. So it was really me that took that theater to places that my dad would have been really proud of. He would have never thought he would have ever seen grosses that I was able to bring to that theater. And one in particular that was filmed in California called the Tammy Show, T-A-M-I. It stood for Teenage Music International. And I happened to see it when I was in college in Starkville, Mississippi, and I said, this movie will do out-of-sight business in Clarksdale, Mississippi. And we played it for 4 days. That's a lot back then in the 60s. And I said, I wish he were allowed to see all the people we couldn't handle more than, it would be 600 people in that theater, and we'd have 600 people outside waiting to get in. And it wasn't a time schedule. You just let people come in and out at a time, come in the middle of a movie, end of a movie, it didn't make any difference. And I think we went on to about midnight that weekend. And it was just amazing. And you got to remember the admission was only 25 cents for adults and 10 cents for children. And candy was a nickel and a dime, and popcorn was a nickel and a dime. So you can imagine what you sold that particular weekend. It was really unbelievable.
You had a lot of people going in multiple times to see the show.
Oh, absolutely. Some of them wouldn't leave, and we never forced anybody to leave. Where when you go to a movie now, you go at 7 o'clock and the 9 o'clock and 11 o'clock, and once you're out, you go out, and it's just different. But I never thought my dad knew what people wanted, and I'm being young enough. I says, and we had competition. There was a little theater around the corner called the Savoy, and I was thinking, why are they playing these movies? Well, I got a little aggressive, I guess, when I was a teenager, and I'm probably like that even my adult life. Well, for example, one particular studio sold to our competitor, and he had 3 big movies. I don't know if you want me to get this specific, but Rio Bravo, Westbound, and The Hanging Tree, all westerns, big westerns with big name stars. And we didn't do business with that particular company for whatever reason. I didn't know lots of times, as I learned years later, it's a personal thing. You have relationships with certain people and certain companies. The movie industry is another subject I could talk about that I could go on for hours. But anyway, I decided I'm not going to accept this. I wrote a letter over the heads of the branch manager to the office in New Orleans and made him an offer and told him exactly how much I would be willing to pay for these 3 movies. And I got all 3 of them. And it started a little bidding war with my competitors because they were furious because I picked the cream of the crop out of that because Warner Brothers had a lot of high-class movies that wouldn't have done that well, musicals and things like that. And my dad, he was kind of in awe that I did something. I didn't even tell him. I just did it. And I'm probably not even old enough to sign contracts, but I did it anyway. And so that sort of started it. So what happened was we decided to bring our film costs down because we knew what the theaters in Greenville, Mississippi, which was bigger than Clarksdale, was paying for movies. And I said, we need to bring our costs down. We need to see if we can buy the Savoy Theater. So we tried. It was a family out of Memphis that owned it. And we tried over and over. We just figured we could make all that money back in a few years by bringing our film costs down. And woe and behold, they would not sell because they were probably doing all right too. And then I woke up, I just remember I was in 10th grade and got a call from a friend of mine said the Savoy Theater burned down. So that brought our film costs down and we didn't have to buy the theater and everything went on. And as time went on, the theater just continued to do well. And the new Roxy was well known. I'm sitting here doing this interview with you, and I got a lot of calls from people all over the country wanting to know about the history of black theaters. I'd get calls from Kansas City. Somebody's doing a book or an essay on something because of the new Roxy. It's on the historic register, I think, over there. And I think right out in front of the theater right now, there's a plaque for Sam Cooke, who grew up there. So Muddy Waters, all of the Ike Turner. I don't know how many more.
Tell us your story about Ike Turner.
And when I was a kid, I would hang out at the theater. Ike Turner worked for my dad on the popcorn machine, and he would pick me up when I was a kid and let me dump the popcorn out of the machine. And I just thought that was so cool. And there was another guy that used to come around and hang out with my dad. And a lot of people, even the lady that owns the theater now and other people were in awe when I told her who it was. But there was a guy by the name of Max Palmer who was either 7 foot 8 inches or 8 foot 7 inches, supposedly at that time, the tallest man in the world. And he would come to that theater and sit there and take up the tickets. Well, the little kids were scared to death of him because they thought he was some sort of freak. When he'd walk down the streets, Clarksdale would, let everybody know that Max Palmer was in town. And I believe when he passed away, they had to have a exercise coffin or custom-made coffin for him. But he did actually play in 2 movies. One was called Invaders from Mars, which he was one of the Martians. It came out in the 50s, released by 20th Century Fox. And one called Killer Ape. Low-budget exploitation movies, but did decent business. And those are the only 2 that I recall that he actually was in. And we would play that up. And he would always come by the theater when he was in town, just sit there and see my dad, take up tickets. everybody used to come there and just kind of hang out a little bit. And then all my cousins and all my relatives who had come from other places, they loved going to the New Roxy. I've got cousins in Ohio, remember, they would come every summer, and I would take them there. They always liked going there. And like I say, as time went on, when we had rented the theater and I had sort of gotten out of it and I'd gotten married and was living in Florida, the roof caved in. On the ceiling caved in on the theater, so it went in disarray for a number of years, and it stayed empty. And when I ended up, after I had left General Cinema Theaters, I went back, bought the 2 theaters downtown, and said I'm gonna try to bring back the New Roxy, and I did spend about $40,000 trying to bring it back. But the town at that time did not need 3 theaters. So all you were doing was splitting the gross, and you're not really making more money, but you got more expenses. So we kept it open for a couple of years, maybe 2.5 years, and then we just finally, closed it down until Robin, I believe, or there may have been somebody before Robin that bought it, and then Robin bought it from them. And then she's done a pretty good job of what she's transformed it into. From what I understand, she's had some really great blues groups that was untapped when I was a kid. I knew what blues music was about because I grew up with it on that Sequina, hanging out in all the stores and the restaurants and all that on the streets. We used to roam those streets. So I knew what blues was all about. And I didn't know what the big deal was, but it had gotten really big. And Robin, did a good job of what she had to work with. And when I went there year before last, I walked into the theater and I see Robin. I see this theater totally different than the way you've got it fixed. And I had to tell her where everything was. The concessions were here. This was here. We moved the water fountain from here to over there. And then I used to do a storage room here. And then here's where a lot of the women would sit waiting on their kids to come out of the theater. We had a seating area, like on a patio, where they could wait on their kids, nurse babies, do whatever. And it was just a unique experience that you don't realize how unique it is until it's over. And just the fond memories there were just unbelievable. And I don't know what else to say.
Well,
you have questions?
What you're saying is how I feel about the theater and how I feel about this theater. I never got to go to the New Roxy. It was not around then. I recall going for walks around Clarksdale with my dad and him pointing out to me where theaters were and telling me about the movies that he used to watch. Why are theaters so special? This theater in particular is special. Yeah. But why are theaters so special?
I just think it's just a really, back then, and still even today, sort of like restaurant, it's a good social gathering. Number one, people today want to be in. They want to know, oh yeah, I saw this movie. Yeah, I saw it in New York, or I saw it here. I just think theaters have changed over the years, and now you can just see from what you would get at a theater how it has expanded now into almost a venue for food and drinks, where before, as I was growing up, and what I had learned was you make your money on popcorn and Coke. And when I went to work for General Cinema Theaters, I had about 60 screens that I represented here. Most of them lost money because of the splits you have with distributors. And they made money when you plugged in the popcorn and Coke. Now, we would charge 10 cents for a box of popcorn, a nickel for a bag, and a nickel and a dime for a drink, where today it's $8 for a box of popcorn or a bag of popcorn and $5 for a drink. And by the time you get out of a theater and a family of four, you're going to spend about 50 or 60 bucks today, as opposed to you'd be hard pressed to even spend $5, back then, where you could. And I, as a kid, would go down there and eat candy and eat popcorn and eat ice cream and go home and be sick as a dog that night and having take some kind of medicine that I was eating too much junk as a kid. But today, it's just totally different. And I think people miss that venue of the large theater that you can see. And I just happened to be at my granddaughter's graduation in Knoxville, Tennessee, right before Christmas. And I walked downtown because I went to school there my freshman year. The reason why I transferred from Tennessee to Mississippi State, my dad had died, and I had to get closer to home to sign contracts, and Knoxville was too far away. So that's why I came back to Mississippi to finish college. And what you would find was I could stay on top of things. I could go home if I had to on the weekends if they needed me. And if I knew there was going to be a big weekend, I would do that too. At the same time, I did okay in college. Well, I did better than okay, but that was a lot. I look back and I'd say, how could a 13, 14-year-old do all that? At one time, after my dad had died, what does a 14-year-old know about paying taxes? Well, I didn't know anything other than I used to see the bills come in, and I saw where the taxes on the building at that time were $800 on the New Roxy Theater. So I would collect money back then. There were no credit cards, so everything was cash. And so I would take a little cash from every weekend because I knew come August, taxes had to be paid. And I would take that money and not tell my mother or tell anybody about it. And I would put it in candy boxes, like butternut and some of these different candy. And I put them in candy boxes behind the safe. And I put that money in there. And come August, I'd walk downtown with $800 and go pay her taxes on the building. I said, I got kids in college now that don't know about paying taxes and things like that. And I think that's why I decided I wanted to work in the business, but I also got kind of interested in politics too as I got educated and learned a lot, particularly being in Mississippi. I worked in a campaign, the guy lost, and I was kind of disillusioned. But I'd been in college, and my eyes were, I eventually got into liking political science, and I got my master's in it, and I got my minor in business, actually almost a double major. But I had learned so much in business, it wasn't too much books could teach me at that age. Like I said, I just recall in the early 50s going to Memphis and letting my dad let me book a movie, which was not a good movie to book, but it was something I liked as a kid. And then you learn later on, we got to get the right kind of movies in here, which I just thought he was out of it, out of the loop when it came down to the kind of movies that would go there. I said, we're getting beat up by that little theater around the corner, and that's not going to happen. So I guess maybe I just had an aggressive behavior, and I kind of went after them and went after and write letters and went over their heads and went to the companies that they did well with, and some I was successful with, some I wasn't. And we just trucked along, and I remember just walking down Film Row in Memphis with carrying that briefcase. It was bigger than I was, but I loved staying out of school on Mondays because Mondays were the day you'd go to Memphis, and every now and then they'd let me skip and go to Memphis and do the bookings. And then as my dad got sick, he really relied on me a lot, but I'm still a teenager and I'm still young, and sometimes I resented that because I'm getting to the point where I'm interested in girls, I'm interested in going out with my friends and things like that, and you know, they'd have to call me somewhere and find me and say, well, they're real busy, they need you down, and I have to leave, you know. But as I look back, you know, wasn't a big deal. You just are young and stupid, just, you know, do crazy things. But like I say, it sent 7 kids to college. No student debt, nothing like that. And some of them went to private schools and, you know, went away to school and all that. And somehow we made it. I don't know how, but we did.
I think it's great. And what was it like growing up in Clarksdale being Lebanese?
Uh, it was not, it was a little different in that you were a minority group. The Lebanese, the Italians, and the Jews. We even had a synagogue. And of course, I grew up Catholic, but a lot of ethnic groups, Italians also, were Catholic. And the Catholics were just not well liked. You got to remember, too, Mississippi was a Baptist state. In fact, I even had a major advisor tell me, as I got older and I sort of saw all of the discrimination that was just kind of underneath there, as I look back, my dad had some friends, but only up to a point would they invite you to this or that. And those groups had to prove themselves, just like, I guess, a lot of ethnic groups. They all came through Ellis Island and, you know, ended up, my family, my dad said they were on their way to Louisiana and they got stuck in the Mississippi Delta. That's how we got there, in a Baptist state. But my major advisor basically said they should cut Mississippi off the map, float it out into the Gulf of Mexico, put a roof on it, and declare it a Baptist church. Because you probably only had about, in the entire state, maybe 30,000 Catholics in the entire state. So you really weren't in the religion, because religion is big in small towns. The church you go to, it's a social event. Even today, if you don't go to church, and I'm not a big church goer, you don't fit in. And when we went back, when I bought those theaters, I kept them for about 14, 15 years. But I came back to Florida after 4 because I really didn't fit in over there on a social level, even with people I grew up with. Because after a few hello, how are yous, I don't have anything in common with them. And I'd been in a big city. I'd worked for a big theater corporation. You dealt with a lot of different people. It was just not the same. So we came back, but the time I was there, my mother got to know my kids when they were little, and she died while we were there. And once she passed away, it was easier for me to come back. And that's why we came back to Florida. And I'm still a big movie guy, movie buff. I've got probably 600 or 700 VCRs of videotapes. I've got old Western movies. I said, we played this at the New Roxy in the 50s. It was called The Last of the Bad Men. And you know who was real popular was Audie Murphy. People loved Audie Murphy. People loved Randolph Scott. People loved John Wayne. And I always wanted those kind of movies. Now the Mark Stevens and the Touch Connors and all these others, just so-so. There was a film company that came onto the scene probably a little bit right after my dad passed away, called American International Pictures. And they were more or less a double feature. type of company. They would have the colossal beast and the 50-foot woman together, both about 60 minutes. That's what kept a lot of the small towns in business, was AIP, that eventually sold out to Filmways. But you can see a lot of their old movies, Little Shop of Horrors, Roger Corman. In fact, I asked for a Roger Corman book because he could take $25,000 and make a movie in 4 days, like the Little Shop of Horrors, and turned into a musical and turned into a play that I love. And it was just so B-grade and black and white, and it was just an okay movie. But this guy had a pulse. Then he knew when to get into musicals. He knew when to get into Hot Rod Girls and Hell on Wheels and all those kind of movies.
Horror.
And the horror movie, and then he got into the Edgar Allan Poe's, The Fall of the House of Usher. And I can remember that. I said, that's going to be a big one. I want that at the New Roxy for a Christmas movie. And of course, we're having Christmas, and Christmas is a big day at the movies. So we worked on Christmas, but we also would have a big dinner with family and all that. And we all had to go downtown. We had to get there to the theater because we could tell if there was a crowd out front, we were going to be busy. And that particular day, the movie didn't show up. So the projectionist called me and says the film didn't come in. So I had to call the distributor in Memphis and find out what happened. I finally got him on the phone, and he says, I've got the film. I'll meet you in Tunica, Mississippi. So I had to leave, go to Tunica, forget dinner at Christmas, go pick up that film and get it to the theater in time. So, I mean, it was stuff nobody else would have done in my family. My dad couldn't have done stuff like that. And luckily I was driving, at the time. But I said, The Fall of the House of Usher. So when I see it every now and then, I tell my wife, I said, yeah, I can tell you a story about that movie. Just something I remember about a particular movie. And when I came back to Florida, I made up my mind we were coming back here. And I had a manager over there. He was excellent. And I said, but we're going to play this movie the weekend we're leaving. And I have to be here for that. We can't go. And it was called Purple Rain. And I played it at the downtown theaters. The New Roxy was closed. And that turned out to be the highest grossing movie I had ever had, that probably that town had ever seen. I think in 3 days, with $3 admissions back then, we took in about $20,000 in 3 days. And luckily, everybody, white, black, you name it, came from all over. And then when I opened those theaters, like I say, as I went back, before the Roxy was open, I'd started the Rocky Horror Picture Show in Tampa and kept that thing going for about 4 or 5 years. Even when I left, it was still playing. And I brought it to Clarksdale. I played the Rocky Horror Picture Show. I said, you wouldn't believe the people that came from all over those towns. I said, I didn't realize we had weirdos in Mississippi who came dressed, with pink hair or blue eyes or whatever. I said, I didn't realize, there was Oxford and no white theater, black theater would have played that kind of movie. And the closest thing to an all-black successful theater was the Daisy and the New Daisy in Memphis, Tennessee on Beale Street. Beale Street, the only thing that was left when I was graduating from high school, because we went up to Beale Street to Lansky Brothers to get wild tuxedos for graduation. I had a Madras, and another guy had a red one. We went up there, and when the New Daisy was open, and I went by there just to talk to the people at the theater. The Daisy and the New Daisy were the big black theaters in Memphis. And it was just really interesting to see that you still had them. Oh, yeah, that's a 15-minute one.
Okay.
Sorry. New Daisy, yeah, yeah. Those were the black theaters that were still operating in the 60s. And I think probably by the time the black theaters are just single screen theaters were going out. You had the fourplexes and then the sixplexes. And we kept thinking, well, eventually somebody's going to build a theater and it's going to be just like it used to be. And getting back to the train of thought that I had when I was in Knoxville at my granddaughter, we walked downtown. Believe it or not, you know, most every town, the downtown is called Main Street. Well, guess what? In Knoxville, it was called Gay Street. And I loved it because it meant happy. Gay didn't mean what it means when you say a person is gay. But I said, I love it. I said, Lily, it's going to be called Gay Street, you know. And went down Gay Street. I said, it's all changed since I was here because I was only there 1 year. I said, but they had 3 movie theaters. The Tennessee, the Sanger, every city had a Sanger, and every city had a Bijou theater. And they were all operating. And the marquees were up there. And it was gorgeous. I said, man, this is what I grew up with, going to a movie, because it was a big event to go to the Malco, and it was just an event to go see the Sound of Music at one of these types of theaters and so forth. And when I used to go to New York, and I'd go down to Times Square, I used to love to go to not the big ones, but the ones that were playing the double features and so forth in Times Square. I always liked the smaller venues, the one around the corner, the little neighborhood theaters where you had your big ones downtown, then you had spread out all the other little theaters. But those downtown theaters in Knoxville, well, Regal Cinema is based out of there, so they apparently have kept those theaters up. That's where their headquarters were. Anyway, what else?
Yes. There's a lot. I don't know where to go.
Yeah. Just to add a little bit to it, at the time growing up, we actually had 7 screens in Clarksdale. You had the Tyson, you had the Paramount, and you had one called the Delta Theater. Those were the 3 downtown. Then you had the New Roxy across the railroad tracks and the Savoy. And up toward 4th Street in Clarksdale was one called the Harlem. And our cousin operated the Harlem. He only ran it on weekend. And it was just a real small theater. And he would only run weekend movies. Well, the Harlem was never a competitor up to us. But the Savoy was. And that's the one I went after to want to get the better movies. And after a while, we did. We had them all. And particularly when it burned down, we had whatever we wanted, and we had lower film roll too at the same time. But like I said, talking about the film industry in itself, that's another story.
I feel like you're telling me the other half of a story that I know. Like, I know the story from my dad's side where he talks about going to this movie theater that he really likes and seeing these things brought to him, and he talks about how good they make him feel. Talks about how much he likes the movie theater, how much he likes the New Roxy and going there, how it's a place where he can take his friend and they can hang out and they can watch movies all day.
All day.
Also.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Right? And so now I feel like I'm learning the other half about where the movies came from and how the theater developed. And so I feel like I'm getting the other side.
Yeah. Well, what happened was, it was the big social event in Clarksdale for black entertainment. There wasn't a whole lot. You might have had a few juke joints here and there around town, but nothing that was like the New Roxy, which I believe, seat-wise, it was the largest theater black theater in Mississippi, including Jackson, Jackson, Mississippi. And I just remember seeing that movie, The Help, and how the blacks were going to the movie in downtown Jackson, and they were having to go to the balcony. And that was the same way with the Paramount. I don't know if you noticed, but there was an alley entrance there that is still there. Mm-hmm. And it's funny, I don't know if they turned it into a music venue, but a guy by the name of Larry Thompson must have donated some money before they totally gotten rid of the auditorium, where they might have had concerts and things like that. And his name, I think, might still be there, but you can still see those stairs where the alley entrance was there. And that's how it was in Jackson. I just think with the people that we had working there was a lady by the name of Bobby Watson. And Bobby was the most unique thing for Clarksdale that you had ever seen. It was a black woman that she might have been married at one time, but she ended up adopting 2 kids, and even one of them worked as she got older on the popcorn machine. And I think her son, I saw something when I was over there, I think he's a minister it's somewhere in the Delta, I don't know where. But Bobby pretty well ran that theater, and she kept those teenagers in line, because she would go marching with the flashlight up and down the aisles. You don't see that anymore. And if a boy was holding the girl's hand, she wouldn't allow that. She would get on to him. No, you put your hand over there. You don't be holding her hand. I know her mama, she won't be happy with you. She would patrol that just like a policeman in that theater. Then you had Rabina, who sold tickets. She worked there for years. And her family was just the most welcoming, funny group that we've ever had. And then we had Florence on the popcorn machine, and they loved working there, and everybody knew them. And then Charlie would come. He was sort of like the guy in Fried Green Tomatoes. He would hang out, and all of a sudden he'd get on the train and leave for months, and all of a sudden he'd come back. Charlie would come back because he had worked at the old Roxy. And then there was Buster, who was the projectionist. And I always liked it when I would get these trailers that I knew we were going to have a big audience, and maybe the Platters were in the trailer, wanted him to put it on and show it that night, because that was maybe a night we would have bingo night, or some kind of giveaway night, like on a Thursday night you have something special. And that brought in a lot of people during the week, because our busiest days were really the weekends. And this is when cotton was king, and you actually had people picking cotton. And when they made money, that whole town made money. When cotton was king, everybody did well. And but that was rough. That's hard labor. You know, I don't know how people could do that. You know, but they would come to town, and we always made sure we had westerns on the weekends. You never played a horror movie on Friday or Saturday. That was set for Sunday and Monday. And you would have like a Sunday, Monday, then a Tuesday, Wednesday, which was kind of slow, but and then you had your Thursday night if you had, and then you go back to the weekend. But you always try to do something to bring up Tuesday, Wednesday business. But it was still tough. And that's still tough today in theaters today. In fact, theaters today are having a really hard time with these plexes, where the parking lots used to be full, but you know what it is today. People watch movies at home. When I worked in the business, I had to go to screenings. I had to go to a lot of Friday night, Thursday night sneak previews and all that when my kids were small. And luckily that was here in Jacksonville, where all the film companies were, not the studios. The studios tried to start here back in the early 20s, and the people didn't want it, and you guess what they did? Well, we'll just go to California. We could have been LA, here. I mean, you have old remnants of old companies back in the 20s and 30s that had headquarters, here. But once they closed all the exchanges in the Memphis area, they moved everything to Atlanta, and then they moved everything to Dallas, and then eventually, as the industry had changed, you have New York and LA because of technology. And so if you look around and go to these small towns now, small town theaters don't exist. Even in Cleveland, Mississippi, where there's a college, I don't even think they have a movie theater anymore. Where in Starkville they do, and in Oxford they do. But most of these towns are gone, and they won't come back. In Clarksdale, whoever owns the showcase, I think they call it the Delta Theater now, they don't even open during the Blues Festival, where they could be playing all kinds of different kinds of movies, but it's just not there anymore.
I wonder if it's people need something to watch, right? Like if we're in small towns, what's going to draw them to movie theaters now? Yeah. I don't know if there is anything really. They've got the internet.
You do.
So the only other thing really is camaraderie. You got to want to go there to hang out, the way people did before.
They
got
did.
to want to go there to be with other people. Yeah. I don't know if we're trying to really foster that around.
I don't think so anymore. There's so many other venues now that people have access to. They living in different communities. They meet at people's houses nowadays. Yeah. The schools are totally different. They are just one big school as opposed to a lot of the small schools that we used to have growing up.
Do you remember my grandfather or A.C. Jones Jr.?
Oh my God, yes, A.C. Yes. Oh God, I can see him right now.
Oh, really? Okay, so I don't have to show you photos.
First thing I could tell you is he was not real tall. No. Was it?
That's my uncle.
Oh.
And you may remember when he was a little younger. That's A.C. Jr. After college, I know this is the thing. I know I did not want to go back to Mississippi.
Yeah.
I did not think that there was anything for me there.
Yeah.
And even now, my thought about it is I love it.
See,
I love my connection to it.
Right.
But am I going to be able to get a job teaching filmmaking, teaching other people to make films? No. There's not really much space there.
No.
The only other thing about Clarksdale that I really, really love is I remember my grandmother and grandfather having a nice garden, a little plot that they farmed on, and bringing all that stuff back and having to shell peas and corn and things like that. I like that stuff.
Yeah.
And now even today, like I have a garden, I try to grow some things, but mostly it's flowers. So I try to grow some things because of that connection. And if I did ever move back to Mississippi or move back to Clarksdale, it would be to just do that. Yeah. To just grow things.
Exactly.
And sell those things.
Right.
Or even give it away, to be honest.
Right.
That's what I would do.
Yeah. Did you ever go to Abe's Barbecue in Clarksdale?
Probably once or twice, but it's like what you were saying about the blues. When it's in your own backyard, you don't pay attention to it as much, right? Yeah. I don't need to go to Abe's. My mom can make barbecue.
Right. And there's another one called Rest Haven. Sounds like a cemetery, but it was on the other end of the Highway 61 there. And those people, the food is excellent, And here, they're both Lebanese people that own both of those now. Now downtown, I used to know all those restaurants and things, but they're all gone, and there may be some new ones there that I don't. People say Stone Pony or this. I don't remember those.
Yeah, they're downtown. They're pretty new. And
Yeah.
they're all right. They're serviceable. Yeah.
Yeah. And I remember, the Alcazar Hotel where my sister got married, when I was a kid, and the Paramount we always went to. See, I would even go to movies when I was a kid. To the Paramount, and then I would walk over to the New Roxy, and we'd go to the movies there. But particularly when we had a lot of cousins, and particularly the ones from Memphis that would come down, because they always loved coming to Clarksdale. In fact, my aunt said, Cindy loves going there. She thinks she's going to Europe. you know. But I mean, it had really good memories. Even Michelle remembers. My wife remembers. How they were trying to bring it back in the 70s, kind of like a little New Orleans, and nice boutiques, but you didn't have enough people to sustain nice men's stores. We had really nice men's stores when I was growing up, and you had really nice men's stores on Essequina, too. Did you ever see that book, Essequina?
You have it over there.
Yeah.
And I did get my own copy. Yes.
Because I was going to give you that one if you didn't get it.
Yes.
I was going to say, I bet if he doesn't have this, I really should give it to him. Let me just say, the girl that wrote that book, Margie Kirstein, she needed a proofwriter. She didn't she should have had somebody. Because she's got some information in there when she talks about me and my family and all that on the new Roxy and the old Roxy and all that. Then another page over, she's talking about the Tyson, the other theater, and talking about how Mr. Williams had owned the new Roxy. Well, he never owned the new Roxy, and she knew that. And why? Like I said, she needed a proofreader, and where she got that information from, I don't know. But she knew better than that because she went to high school with my sisters. And she would call me when she was working on this book for a couple, 3 years. She'd call me here and ask me different questions about it. I said, but I have a good friend over in Montgomery, Alabama. She says, like me, Margie needed a proofreader, And she and I are pretty close. We're different. We're the same, but basically come from pretty different black backgrounds. Us being Lebanese and she's being, lily white. See, you would think other types of businesses would come there where they could build more hotels and more restaurants, and it just brings more people back, more so than just one time. Like I said, we were in there one night. And it wasn't during the Blues Festival, it was just another time when they had something going on. And these people were from Sweden, came all the way from Sweden over there. And I think Morgan Freeman had been there earlier, during the day. And Morgan had opened a restaurant back in 03, 04 called Medidi's. And it was where an old men's store was. Very upscale. It was very nice. It lasted a couple of years. I can name so many of them that we had such upscale. We even had fancy dress shops from Memphis that used to be there in the Delta. Because I'm going to tell you, these Delta people are different than the Hill people. It's totally different. They think they're better than everybody else. And they look at the white people up in the hills as white trash is how they look at. And when I even went to school there, and I was around those white boys from Natchez and all them, I said, boy, they talk funny. Like I don't have an accent. My kids still make fun of me the way I talk. But I said, boy, those people really talk country. It was just different. It was a little cultural shock for me from the Delta over to the hills of Mississippi. It's quite a change.
I think what Clarksdale needs to do is switch to education
Okay.
and business education in order to their students in Clarksdale. Give incentives for your students to return to Clarksdale and start businesses. And start businesses providing the services that people in the town need and want. They need a lot of places to eat food. They need more places besides Walmart to buy clothing and other things. And until more investment is made in trying to keep people here, I don't think it's going to be as successful as it once was. It cannot rely on blues tourism if it only comes 3 times a year.
Yeah, they really can. I totally agree. And the few people who stay there are just sort of wedded in. I mean, they've been there so long, change doesn't work unless they're older and their kids have moved and they get sick and they have to go move, with the parent. But there used to be a sign up front, 20,000 people welcome you to Clarksdale, coming in on Highway 61. And Starkville was probably 8 or 10,000 at the time. And Starkville's about 30 some odd thousand now, not counting the college. And the college got 20,000 students. And you can see their infrastructure changing and what happened over there versus what happened in Clarksdale, because you've only got, 16 or 17,000 people there now. So you were thinking 50 years it would have grown. It didn't. It went the other way. And it probably, the other Delta towns too. Greenville may be a little bit, it was always bigger to begin with. In Cleveland, mainly because of the college, may keep it on a breathing machine a little longer. And then Tunica was dead until those casinos came over there. And it's still on life support. I mean, because the casinos are closing up. This is not Vegas. It's like, even in places like this, you go towards St. Augustine, you had all these outlet malls. People love coming down. They're all drying up. And now with Amazon and all that, how people shop and the big deal was to go to Memphis to go Christmas shopping or go clothes shopping. Used to love to go out. And other people used to like to come to Clarksdale from the smaller towns to I have wonderful memories there, but you can't go back. There's an expression, you can't go back. And I went back and only did it mainly because, I had a chance to get those theaters, all of them. I'd have the whole city. And my mother could get to know my kids. And once she passed away while we were there, we weren't there for 4 years. We came back. We came back here. But we always, when we go home now, we go to Memphis. That's where the family migrated to. And we'll go down to Clarksdale for the day. We'll go to Abe's Barbecue. We'll go down to Peter's or Pottery and the other place. I can't think of the name of it. McCarty's. They do a lot of pottery down there in Mound Bayou and Marigold. And they said a lot of people, those little red light towns now have little subdivisions. The people have kind of moved out a little ways. And the property taxes are high for what you get. The educational system is not that good. And you can't get an industry to go there for their families if you don't have a good education for their kids to go to. And you don't want to have to send your kids to private school. And they have a private school that's still kicking over there. And I wonder much longer it can last in these towns. And that's part of the problem why you won't ever see a movie theater come back in Clarksdale. In fact, you can't even get a grocery store there. Grocery store, oh my God, Kroger, Big Star, you had Locals, you had unbelievable shopping, for grocery. And that's where a lot of those towns would come into. So just sort of dried itself up. And Robin gets entertainment, but here again, she works full time. I think she's a merchant marine.
She has to work elsewhere.
Elsewhere. I think she's in Seattle every so often. That's where she's from. And then she comes to Clarksdale, I guess, during blues or juke joint or whatever's going on. You know, they always have a little of it going on every now and then, but you know, after the festival's over with, you get a handful of people may come through here and there, but nothing to sustain it. You know, any new businesses, you just don't see them, you know, coming up. But anyway, I remember AC. I always liked him. Oh, he was so nice.
Can you tell me any more? About my grandfather, he was an usher there, or my uncle was a projectionist, he said.
Yeah, yeah. That might have been. I called him Buster. It was Buster, and then Sonny, and there was another guy. Yeah, I can't remember all of them. You know,
my dad says that he remembers going to the new Roxy with my uncle and getting the reels for the day.
Yeah.
And he apparently has to check them. My uncle has to check them, test them out, right?
Right.
So he would watch the film, and my brother would sit in the booth with him. He would watch the film. And they would have something to eat from the place across the street.
Across Hamburger Cafe.
Yes,
is what it was called.
So they would get a hot dog and a soda, and they would watch the movies.
And it was funny because what probably attracted my dad to doing a movie theater, that he was part owner of the Hamburger Cafe. He had a partner, and I don't remember that. When they must have done pretty good there, and then finally saw that property came available. Said, we'll build a theater. I remember when they were building the new Roxy as a kid, when they were actually building the theater. And I always like to tell people, I said he had the Roxy open, and then it stayed open a little while when the new Roxy opened, and then he closed it because the new Roxy was a much nicer venue. But I tell people all the time, I said, I bet you that was the first twin cinema in the United States. You never saw two theaters right next door. You'd see one across the street in the big cities or one at this end, but not two right next to. I said, we were the first twin cinema in the country. And that got to be a big deal, having two screens, you know. And then 4, and then 6, now 20 some odd screens. And only people are going to 3 of them because the rest of them are half empty with 4 or 5 people in them. You turn the machine on, it costs you electricity, too much money.
How do you, there's a theater in San Francisco that's, it's super small. It's like maybe from that wall to that wall. Right? And then half of it's seating and the other half is aisle because you have to get to your seat, right? So it's super small.
Yeah.
And I imagine that that's where theaters need to shift. It's gonna cost a lot of money, but they need to shift to smaller venues. Why am I sitting in a theater that's meant for 200 people and there's only 5 of us?
5 of us sitting there.
The feeling of camaraderie and watching this theater with other people doesn't sit well now. No. I mean, I can remember saying, if you can't get 5 people, you don't turn it on. You just send them to another auditorium or give them their money back because it costs you too much money. Or in small towns, because everybody knows everybody. I remember this one guy out at Westgate calling me and says, we've only got 2 people. I said, give them their money back, give them a pass or something, because there was the Catholic fair going on that night. Well, that's the big event where everybody goes eat spaghetti and meatballs, and they have all these booths, to win a teddy bear or something. You know, and they still do that in these small towns. But I will have to tell you one thing. When we went back, in fact, maybe 10, 20 years ago, we happened to go back from our high school reunion. At the same time,
there was the Tennessee Williams Festival going on, because he hung around, and a lot of people in his plays, Cat on a High Tin Roof, Summer and Smoke, all those movies, by people in Clarksdale. And I'll tell you about some of those people in Clarksdale that are so unique, and he hit the nail on the head. I mean, real people. And then Caroline Kennedy was invited there. This was right before Obama's second term. He was running for the second term, and it was in October before the November election of 2012 is when it was. And they had it at the Catholic school where I went to grammar school, and it was this big old building called Coutre Mansion. Well, that was where I went to kindergarten in there, and the nuns lived upstairs, and that was the school. Then they built the school next door. I said, I can't believe it. We're on the grounds where I used to play Little League baseball. This is the field. That's where I went to. I'm telling Michelle, I said I went to kindergarten in that room over there, and here was Caroline Kennedy out on the in the grass, and a few people came, maybe 50, 100. I said, I want to go hear her speak. It's on education. And then she said, before I get started, I want to go over there and shake that man's hand. And she went over there. It was James Meredith, who had first at Ole Miss. And the reason why I didn't go to Ole Miss was because he was going to go to Ole Miss, and my parents were scared there was going to be a lot of problems with those people in Mississippi. Being Lebanese, I think they sensed that, something could happen. It was a modern day civil war. And that's why I never considered going to Ole Miss, because it was closer to my house in Mississippi State. And after that it happened, but I got to meet him. He was in his 70s at the time. And what an honor that was for me to meet him. And then when Obama won the second term, and the Mississippi press basically was saying Romney was going to win. And it really wasn't close. It might have been a little closer, but it wasn't that close to the first time he ran. Ole Miss had tried to really break away from all that bad publicity from the 60s. And they had run off a bunch of great folks from law school after 62. It has never recovered since then. They had a statue of James Meredith there. And the day after the election, somebody put a noose around it. I said, things change, but they don't change. They're just more subtle with this thing nowadays than they used to be. And of course, everybody can vote now, as opposed to the way it used to be when you didn't vote. You paid a poll tax. You had to take a literacy test. Things like that. I remember when I came here and I was teaching at the college, one of the first things I gave out to the students the first day was a copy of the Alabama literacy test. I said, now I want all of you guys to take it. And if you don't pass the grade, you can't vote. And they all took it, and they were shocked, absolutely shocked. How many square miles is the District of Columbia? That was the question.
I've got to get my hands on this, and I've got to give that to my students. Yeah.
And it's funny, I had a student, I used to give it out every year. I don't know what happened. But one of the girls who's retired from teaching, who was a student of mine at the time, on Facebook said, Newman, I give the Alabama literacy test every year to my students. And when she was teaching, she's retired now. She used to give, she says, that really came home to me. I mean, some of those questions, it was like 70 or 80 questions. And of course, if you were white, you passed. And if you were black, I don't care if you missed one, you didn't pass. It was so discriminatory. But that was the most comprehensive one I saw, where Mississippi was mainly the poll tax. You had to pay. And then, of course, when they passed the Voting Rights Act, that took care of a lot of that. But I was in college at the time when Goldwater was running against Johnson. I thought Goldwater was going to be president, because that's all the Mississippi press carried. 88% of the people voted for Goldwater. And I was shocked that Lyndon Johnson won the second. But I had a book written by a professor at Ole Miss called Jim Silvers called Mississippi, the Closed Society. And I'd forgotten it. I'd forgotten. I don't know. I gave it to somebody to read. I don't know what happened to it. But if you ever run across it, it's worth reading. And the issue that that would come up about voting was it was pre-1964. The Alabama Literacy Test, Mississippi, the Closed Society, that particular book. It was just crazy, to think that Gore was not going to win. I was shocked because you only getting that. When I was at Mississippi State in 1963,
Like, I know the story from my dad's side when he talked about going to this movie theater that he really liked and seeing these things brought to him, and he talked about how good they make him feel, about how much he likes the movie theater, how much he likes the new Roxy going there, how it's a place where he can take his friend and they can hang out and they can watch movies all day.
all day, yeah, absolutely.
So now I feel like I'm learning the other half about where the movies came from and how the theaters developed. And so I feel like I'm getting the other side.
Yeah. Well, what happened was it was it was the big social event in Clarksdale for black entertainment. There wasn't a whole lot. You might have had a few juke joints here and there around town, uh, but nothing that was like the New Roxy, which I believe seat wise, it was the largest theater, black theater in Mississippi, including Jackson, Jackson, Mississippi. And I just remember seeing that movie, The Help, and how the blacks were going to the movie in downtown Jackson, and they were having to go to the balcony. And that was the same way with the Paramount. I don't know if you noticed, but there was an alley entrance there that is still there. And it's funny, I don't know if they turned it into a music venue, but a guy by the name of Larry Thompson must have donated some money when before they totally got rid of the auditorium, where they might have had concerts and things like that. And his name, I think, might still be there, but you can still see those stairs where the alley entrance was there. That's how it was in Jackson. I just think with the people that we had working there was a lady by the name of Bobby Watson. And Bobby was the most unique thing for Clarksdale that you had ever seen. Here was a black woman that she might have been married at one time, but she ended up adopting two kids, and even one of them worked as she got older on the popcorn machine. And I think her son, I saw something when I was over there. I think he's a minister at somewhere in the Delta. I don't know where. But Bobby pretty well ran that theater, and she kept those teenagers in line because she would go marching with the flashlight up and down the aisles. You don't see that anymore. And if a boy was holding the girl's hand, she wouldn't allow that. She would get on to him. Nuh-uh, you put your hand over there. You don't be holding her hand. I know her mama. She won't be happy with you. She would patrol that just like a policeman in that theater. Then you had Rabina, who sold tickets. She worked there for years. And her family was just the most welcoming, funny group that we've ever had. And then we had Florence on the popcorn machine, and they loved working there, and everybody knew them. And then Charlie would come. He was sort of like the guy in Fried Green Tomatoes. He would hang out, and all of a sudden he'd get on the train and leave for months, and all of a sudden he'd come back. Charlie would come back because he had worked at the old Roxy. And then there was Buster, who was the projectionist. And I always liked it when I would get these trailers that I knew we were going to have a big audience, and maybe the Platters were in the trailer, wanted him to put it on and show it that night, because that was maybe a night we would have bingo night, or some kind of giveaway night. Like on a Thursday night, you have something special. And that brought in a lot of people during the week, because our busiest days were really the weekends. And this is when cotton was king, and you actually had people picking cotton. And when they made money, that whole town made money. When cotton was king, everybody did well. And but that was yeah, that was rough. That's hard labor. I don't know how people could do that. You know, but they would come to town, and we always made sure we had westerns on the weekends. You never played a horror movie on Friday or Saturday. That was for Sunday and Monday. And you would have like a Sunday, Monday, then a Tuesday, Wednesday, which was kind of slow, but and then you had your Thursday night if you had, and then you go back to the weekend. But you always try to do something to bring up Tuesday, Wednesday business. But it was still tough, and that's still tough today, in theaters today. In fact, theaters today are having a really hard time with these plexes, where the parking lots used to be full, but you know what it is today. People watch movies at home. When I worked in the business, I had to go to screenings. I had to go to a lot of Friday night, Thursday night sneak previews and all that when my kids were small. And luckily, that was here in Jacksonville, where all the film companies were, not the studios. The studios tried to start here back in the early 20s, and the people didn't want it. And you guess what they did? Well, we'll just go to California. We could have been L.A. Here. I mean, you have old remnants of old companies back in the 20s and 30s that had headquarters, here. But once they closed all the exchanges in the Memphis area, they moved everything to Atlanta, and then they moved everything to Dallas, and then eventually, as the industry had changed, you have New York and LA because of technology. And so if you look around and go to these small towns now, small town theaters don't exist. Even in Cleveland, Mississippi, where there's a college, I don't even think they have a movie theater anymore. Where in Starkville they do, and in Oxford they do, but most of these towns are gone, and they won't come back. Uh, in Clarksdale, whoever owns the showcase, I think they call it the Delta Theater now. Uh, they don't even open during the